2024. Would you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Rice is going to get us started.
Couple preliminary comments. We were last at a hearing on April 30th, I believe, and Mr. Hetzel was on the witness stand, and I think, Mr. Brosman, you'll have some redirect, and then we'll see where we go after that. Just to get on the record, since it's been 2 months plus since we've had a hearing. Just want to make sure that all the parties, the attorneys involved, that we're waiving all the time periods under the MPC. There's certain state law requirements when you have conditional use hearings. You've got to complete it within a certain period of time. The principal case has to be put on within a certain period of time. The township has to guarantee a certain number of hours, et cetera. And the attorneys sitting up front understand what I'm talking about, but it's a state law requirement, and I try to bring it up before every hearing. So is there an agreement on the record with all the parties that all the time periods under the MPC are waived at this point? Mr. Brosman?
Good evening. I'm George Brosman for the applicant. Yes, we had, as you recall, scheduling conflicts, and then I had a surgery in July. I'm still wearing my sling, so I agree that we're okay on the time periods for conducting the hearing, and I waive the requirements for the timing with regard to that and confirm that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brosman. Mr. Marlier?
Yeah, no objection to waiving the time periods under the MPC, Mr. Sills.
Okay. Any objections from any of the resident parties to that broad waiver? Okay. So, so with that, Mr. Hetzel, you are still under oath, and Mr. Brosman, he's your witness on redirect.
Thank you. Eric, at the last hearing, there was some discussion about the mix of bedroom units for the proposed townhomes and the number of bedrooms that you had used in the fiscal impact study you submitted, and whether that was 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms a unit. You testified regarding the impact if it was assumed that all were 4-bedroom units. Do you recall that?
I do.
Yes.
And although you verbally testified regarding that topic, have you now prepared a chart that summarizes that analysis?
I did.
And can you bring up Exhibit A28?
On the screen is Exhibit A28. It shows a fiscal summary using all the same background assumptions that my original analysis used, except that we assumed 4-bedroom units instead of 3-bedroom units, and that all that really impacted was the population projection, because the population multipliers relate to 4-bedroom townhouse units in this study.
And can you explain the 2 columns that you have there on the right?
Yes, the column on the left describes the development, the number of units, the market value per unit, total market value and total assessed value, and then the residential population projection and the school-aged children population. And then it shows the net township fiscal impact and the net school district fiscal impact under that new population projection. How it relates to the earlier analysis is because there are more people as a result of the 4-bedroom multipliers I used, it diminished the net positive fiscal impact to both the township and the school district on the basis of that cost adjustment.
And then why did you do the right column, and can you explain that?
The right column, I used the same Rutgers multipliers for the total persons per unit, but for the school-age children population projection, I used a multiplier that I derived after speaking with the Radnor Township School District Transportation Department about their census of students that live in a sample of similar townhouse communities in the township, where it was discovered that out of 39 townhouse units in Radnor Township, that's based on a list of similar properties, there are 3 school-aged children that are accounted for by the school district. So that relates to a population multiplier of 0.0769 school-aged children per unit. So just for information's sake, I presented that modeled analysis in the right-hand column using, out of the 38 units that are proposed, using that multiplier, it projects there will be 3 school-aged children, which then is obviously a much lower number than the Rutgers multipliers projects. Hence, the school district fiscal impact is much higher because the costs are much lower.
And you testified last time how you got that number from the school district and what projects you looked at, correct?
I did. And I'd just like to correct on this exhibit, this number down at on note number 2 should read 0.0769, just to correct it.
Thank you. You received some questions last time regarding the methodology that you used to prepare the fiscal impact study. You had testified that you prepared that in accordance with generally accepted practices for fiscal impact analysis for proposed land development projects. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And have you utilized the same methodology that you utilized here for any other land development projects that you worked on in Radnor Township?
I have.
And what project was that?
More recently, the 60 West Concordia development as a mixed-use project located on West Avenue, the corner of Lancaster Avenue and Bellevue Avenue. And it's a multifamily condominium type of a development with a small amount of retail on the first floor.
Now, you didn't testify at that hearing, correct?
I did not testify. I provided my analysis, and the applicant submitted that as an exhibit.
And at Exhibit A30, and for the record, we're skipping over A29 for now. We're going to come back to that. Is this a exhibit list that was found on the Radnor Township website for the exhibits that were used in that hearing?
It is.
And is your fiscal impact study listed there?
It is. It's listed as Exhibit A8.
And did you use the same methodology that you used for the current fiscal impact study for this application and that application?
I did. I used the same methodology and the same source of demographic multipliers, but because the unit types were multifamily as opposed to single-family attached, the multipliers were slightly different, but the methodology and the source of the multipliers was identical.
That Rutgers information that you use, is that the source?
Correct.
And did you receive any comments that the fiscal impact study or the methodology or data was found to be unsuitable with regard to that conditional use application?
I received no comments.
Is it your understanding that the township granted conditional use approval for that project?
That's my understanding, yes.
At the last hearing, you received questions, some questions concerning the dates of some of the source information, I guess, for the multipliers that you used in this study. Can you explain why the you believe, in your professional opinion, the use of the methodology and data that you used was valid for this study?
Well, first, it's a fairly commonly used data source for population when you don't have available to you very hyperlocal multipliers that are derived for the specific community that you're in. It is specific to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it's one of the only sources out there. I'm speaking to the Rutgers multipliers now, is one of the only sources out there that characterizes the per unit population on the basis of unit type, whether single-family detached, single-family attached, multifamily owned or rented, and by the number of bedrooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 bedrooms, depending on the type of development. So being that we're trying to show order of magnitude estimates of fiscal impacts, and that population is the driving factor for the cost portion of the analysis, we find that the Rutgers multipliers are suitable, and in some cases tend to overestimate depending on the land use type.
Overestimate what?
Overestimate population.
And
So we feel that it's often a conservative estimate, conservatively high.
And was that borne out by the information you received from the Radnor School District regarding other similar townhome projects in the township?
It was. I consider these that multiplier that I used that was based on that very local and very current data to be as reliable as anything.
And that showed a much, basically showed that your analysis was very conservative. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, yes.
Notwithstanding your professional opinion that you've given about the methodology being used as appropriate, I recall last time that someone brought up the DVRPC, which stands for the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and whether they had multipliers and things like that. Do you recall that?
I do.
And did you take a look at the DVRPC multipliers?
I did. And those multipliers were developed for the DVRPC by eConsult Solutions, which is an economic modeling company. And they were created to assist with the development of a report that analyzes the land use and socioeconomic impacts of multifamily housing specifically. But they did include some analysis of other housing types in addition to the multifamily housing numbers. So I was able to use some of those numbers to do a sort of a comparative analysis of those somewhat more current and more local to southeastern Pennsylvania numbers.
And drawing your attention to Exhibit A29, is that a copy of that summary?
That is, and it looks similar to Exhibit A28. It's a similar summary comparison where I used, again, all the same background assumptions as I did in my original analysis, except for the population multipliers, I used the DVRPC eConsult 2018 multipliers, and you'll note that it's for townhomes of all bedroom configurations, because that source did not break out multipliers by the number of bedrooms. It just had single-family attached, such as townhomes, for across all bedroom configurations. So it's not specific to 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom. It's just all of the bedroom types.
And can you explain the two columns as you did with A28?
Yes. Again, on the left column, it characterizes the development by showing the 38 residential units, same value per unit, the assessed value based on the common level ratio, and then it projects the new residential population using those DVRPC multiplier of 100. It projects that there would be 103 total persons living in the development based on the DVRPC multiplier of 2.72 total persons per unit. And the school-age children is projected to be 23 school-age children based on a multiplier of 0.6. And that's total school-age children. That doesn't account for students that attend non-public schools.
And the right column, could you go over that?
Right. The right column, again, I use the total persons number from the DVRPC eConsult source. But again, I use the multiplier I derived from the local Radnor Township School District analysis I mentioned earlier that projected for the 3 school-age children to be living here, which is a lower number than the 23 that was projected by the eConsult numbers.
And you mentioned now, and it made me think, and you said this last time, in all of your analysis for the anticipated or projected school-age children, is it correct that you assume that all would attend the Radnor Radnor Public School?
That's correct. I took no deduction for students that may be attending non-public schools.
And so that was done to be extra conservative?
It was.
In your experience, is it borne out that way? Do 100% of the school-age students tend to go to Radnor Public School?
No, I actually looked at a source from the U.S. Census, the American Community Survey, 5-year data set from 2022 that estimates that roughly 79% of all school-aged children living in Radnor Township who are enrolled in school attend public schools, and 21% attend non-public schools. So the impact that would have on the projection in the left-hand column, it would reduce that by about 4 or 5 school-age children, which in turn would reduce the cost to the school district and result in a higher net fiscal impact to the school district, higher positive net fiscal impact.
Thank you. That's all I have for Eric.
Mr. Marlier, we cross.
Yes, Mr. Hetzel.
Oh, thanks for loaning it.
Mr. Brosman, do we have paper copies of the exhibits?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can we pass them out to the board, and if any residents want them?
My colleague will do that if that's okay. We've been also emailing those to Peggy in past hearings, so we could do that as well tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If any other parties want some, we could leave some there.
Thank you.
Mr. Hetzel, looking at 828 that you just testified from, the factor you're using for the multiplier is the number of bedrooms, correct?
Correct.
And are there any other factors one could use? You chose to use bedrooms, I understand that, but are there any other factors one can use to make these types of calculations?
Well, there's the unit type, and this is specific to townhome as opposed to single-family detached. There are some attributes that relate to value of the home as well. The value of the home,
What kind of attributes?
just the value. That's about it. The sale price, but hasn't been adjusted for inflation or anything. So I tend to use either the number for all values, or in a case like this where I feel this is going to be a higher value sale price, I'll use the highest category of value in those multipliers.
Are there any other factors? Can you use the size of bedrooms?
I haven't seen studies that use that in the derivation of multipliers, no.
And last hearing, back in April, you testified that you did testify in Hamilton 1, the conditional use application that was brought a few years ago, correct?
Correct.
Now, at that time, the size of the homes was substantially similar, correct?
I don't recall the size of the homes in that. No, I wasn't involved in that aspect. I think it was, I can't recall the home size or the bedroom mix I used in that one.
Can you recall that there was 3 to 4 bedrooms proposed in those units as well?
I don't recall, but it's possible that I used that number.
And if those units were substantially similar in size and 3 to 4 bedrooms, so similar number of bedrooms, the numbers should be similar to what you're stating that they would be now, correct?
If they're the same unit type, if I recall, were they single-family detached units as opposed to townhouse units?
I believe, I wasn't here, you were, but I'm reading over the transcript, it's a very similar proposal, townhomes, just 41, not 38.
Okay,
Does
I
that
don't recall.
refresh
but
your recollection?
It's been a couple of years, and I've done dozens of these studies since then, so.
But if they were substantially similar, the numbers should be similar, correct? You didn't take in the bedrooms being the major factor that you're using, the number of bedrooms,
Correct.
and the fact that they're townhomes. That they're townhomes.
If that is in fact the case, then that's true.
And your testimony tonight, these new calculations, they're still not taking into account the size of the bedrooms, correct?
Correct.
You're not taking into account still the potential for 5 bedrooms or more, correct?
Correct. I used 4 bedrooms because that's what was asked at the last hearing.
Understood. I also asked about 5 bedrooms.
And incidentally, I don't believe that Rutgers has a 5-bedroom category for single-family attached homes.
You're consistent in that testimony. That's what you said last time as well. And all this testimony this evening for A28 and A29, those two calculations, exhibits that show calculations, that's all the square footage remaining the same with the homes. Nothing has changed in that regard, correct?
Square footage doesn't factor into this analysis.
Did the DVRPC study that you used in Exhibit A29 and that which one of the commissioners questioned you about the last hearing, did it break down the multiplier in any other way, any other factors besides the ones you're using?
It just broke it down by all bedroom types and by single-family attached homes. It also had a geographic component, whereas it characterizes communities or the geographic units that they used to derive their multipliers as different levels of development, and it considered Radnor Township to be a, quote, developed community. So there are slight nuances between things like a growing suburb, a developed community, the entire DVRPC study area. So there's slightly different geographic nuances based on those geographic characteristics.
And were all those factors, are they all reflected in your calculations on A29? Exhibit A29?
They are, to the extent that those are the attributes that went into the derivation of those multipliers that were used.
Can you just remind me, when you spoke to Radnor, you testified at the last hearing that you spoke to someone with the Radnor school district. When was that, roughly?
It was this past spring. I think it might have been in March or April. I can't remember the date. I can provide that, but it was as recent as this past spring.
Understood. And to your knowledge, regarding the conditional use hearing for 60 West GP West Avenue that was held on December 5th, 2023, did anyone bring up the DVRPC study?
I wasn't asked to testify, so I wasn't at the hearing. So I don't know if there was any discussion at all about the fiscal analysis. All I know is I wasn't asked to provide any clarifications by my client. And I tried to watch some of the hearings online, and I did not hear any significant real discussion of the fiscal analysis.
I have no further questions, Mr. Rice.
Okay. Resident parties. Gets buried every. Okay, I'm going to go through the list. There seems to be a few people missing from April. Amber Levy. Mr. Chawla. Mr. Clementi.
No questions.
Mr. Curley.
No questions.
Mr. Gato. Cindy Hansen. Kaz Holloway.
No questions.
Mr. Heimel. Ms. Lafarge. Mary Ann Mahoney. Margaret Rushman. Mr. Serene. Mr. Satterfield. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Just I request you make sure you speak into the microphone. Got to get close to it. Or use that one.
I don't want to have two next to each other.
Gregory Zari, 6 Forest Lane. In your testimony, you mentioned several times, and were very clear, that you were talking about single-family attached or townhouse units, as if there is a difference between that and a difference in the multipliers between that and, say, single-family detached homes. Is there, in fact, a difference?
I believe there is.
Okay. Do you know why there would be a difference?
It's borne out by the data. I think it could have something to do with where people are in their lives when they purchase an attached product versus a detached product. They tend to have larger families if they're living in a detached product. And that's borne out by the data. Anecdotally, I can say my observations concur with that.
All right, thank you. That's all I needed to find out. Thank you. Thank you.
Steve Sherry? Megan Sherry? Mr. Shute is not here. Caitlin Silver? Greg Sari? Sharon Willis? David Willis? And Cheryl Lutz? Okay. Any board questions? Commissioner Larkin?
I think that this probably goes without saying, but we're making a record, so I do want to, number one, say it, and number two, if I'm wrong, I want to correct my misapprehension. The numbers that you're providing us with are statistical averages, is that correct?
Correct.
So in any given year, it would be sheer coincidence if you hit the numbers on the head. We're looking for numbers that cluster a little bit above, a little bit below. Is that correct?
Correct. It's meant to provide an order of magnitude estimate to demonstrate whether or not a development comes close to paying for itself or has disproportionate impacts compared to what one might expect from a similar development.
Got it. I want to focus specifically on the school-age children issue. There is nothing that would require there to be 3 new school-age children at this development. It could be 0, right?
Correct.
And it could be half a dozen or more in each home, correct?
Half a dozen school-age children?
Correct.
I suppose it's possible, yeah.
It's statistically unlikely is what you're telling us, but it's not impossible.
Correct.
And you might see a number that, although you're probably not going to get that number of children every single year, you might see one year in which you get a lot of families move in that have children, and then that tails off over time, correct? So you could have one large year and then followed by a number of smaller years, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
More commissioner questions? Yes.
I have one.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't see you. I'm just a little bit confused. When we look at this table or the other one, the net school district fiscal impact, why is it lower if there are more children? Like the 24, it's only $13,000, but with 3, it's $578,000.
Because that's a net annual fiscal impact, which is revenues over costs. And the more children there are, the more costs there are, which reduces the value of the revenues that are collected from things like taxes and other sources. So it costs roughly $28,000 to $30,000 per student to, in the school district to educate them. So with every child that's there, it adds that amount of cost.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Same thing. I guess we're all concentrating on the schools, school district. So in the Rutgers 2006, it's kind of old, but does that number take into account the cost of special ed, children who are in special ed?
It's all of the expenditures in the school district. So yes, everything that's budgeted is accounted for. It's basically taking the total expenditures divided by the number of students in the school district to arrive. And that includes special ed, special programs, student activities, things like that.
Children who are educated outside the school district because they're extraordinary needs, that counts as well?
If it's in the budget, it's accounted for. If it's in the school district budget, it is accounted for in that cost per student number.
Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Any more commissioner questions?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something. I think I may have misheard, but that's why I'm asking. You had mentioned comparables, and that's when you brought up 60 West, when we were looking at these charts about the fiscal impact. Did I hear that that was one of your comps?
That was not a comparable.
Okay.
It's a different type of development. in that
That's
it's
why
a-
I was questioning
That would
that.
be a multifamily, my recollection, I'm not sure if it still is this, but when we modeled it, it was a multifamily, 5+ units in a building, owned units as opposed to rental units.
So, other than running the data, which, I agree, this 2006 seems a little bit old for a model. I don't know how often these get updated. But other than running it through the model, did you do any comps for existing townhome communities here in Radnor? Have you looked at what an existing townhome community in Radnor produces as far as fiscal impact, number of kids, that sort of thing?
Well, the number of kids, we looked, as I mentioned, we looked at 39 units. I don't have the list in front of me, and asked the school district, because they need to know how many students live there because they need to bus them. That's school age, period, not just kids that attended the Radnor schools. And their estimate was there are a total of 3 school-age kids living in those 39 similar townhouse units.
So you gave the school district which units you were comparing?
I did, and they
gave you the
concurred
data.
that they represented what they felt would be a comparable type of a community.
So it was, sorry, I don't mean to be, I'm just trying to get my head around it. So it was a complex of 39 units, or, a grouping, not a unit over there in a townhome and another townhome on the other side of town. It was a neighborhood.
It was several neighborhoods. I didn't pick out any individuals. I just said, of all these homes that exist on these streets, how many students are generated by those townhomes? And they were all townhomes, not single-family not single-family detached or apartment units. They were townhome communities.
And they were all townhomes that would be close in value to this neighborhood?
In my estimation, according to the Delaware County property records, they all came in with assessed values very similar to what these values were modeled at.
Excellent. Thank you for your
I do have,
answers.
I'm sorry, one follow-up. What department, who in the school district did you speak with?
The Transportation Department,
So what does that mean?
it's the department that is in charge of busing, so they need to plan bus routes, how many students need to be picked up from on each street and each bus stop. So they break it down, I believe, by street.
Why did you go to there instead of like the superintendent or?
I started with the superintendent, and they typically direct you to the Transportation Department because that's the department that maintains that level of expertise. On each year, it's updated.
How many other townhomes are valued at, comparable to this? That from the Transportation Department?
Are valued comparable?
Well, no, you said you went to townhomes that were, I believe this is what you said, maybe you didn't. You went to, you asked about townhomes, of the Transportation Department, you asked about townhomes with a similar value to get your numbers of school children.
So, George just provided with my previous testimony. So, we looked at all relatively newer developments. Specifically, I looked at 11 units at Villa Stratford, 8 units at Wayne Walk, 6 units at Jardin, 8 units at Wicklow Court, and 6 units at Bloomingdale Avenue, all relatively newer townhome communities that would have very similar characteristics to what's being proposed.
And they have very few children, not little children, but few children living in these townhomes?
Yeah, a total of 3 have been, that are school-age kids that the Transportation Department has a record of.
Okay.
Just a quick clarification. You were talking, I think it was when you were talking about 60 West, but you mentioned there were differences in rental properties versus properties that are owned. Did you mean that there are differences in the number of children?
The multipliers get down to that level of detail.
Oh.
They make distinctions between owner-occupied versus renter-occupied units.
And what did you use? You used the
I used
owned.
owner-occupied,
Got it.
correct, yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Rice, I just have a quick follow-up, if I may.
Well, hold on. I get to go before you.
Absolutely.
And again, just following up on what Commissioner Mulroney started with, because I had the same question. Both of these, 29 and 28, talk about comparable townhouse properties in Radnor Township. So is that the list that George just gave you? They're the comparable townhouse properties in Radnor Township?
Yes,
Okay, no other properties other than those?
that's correct.
Okay, so who developed that list?
I developed it on the basis of looking to find newer townhouse communities as opposed to older townhouse communities or older, other types of housing. And,
You took that was your list, you took it to the school district,
correct.
and what information did they give you once you took it to the school district?
I asked them, there are these 39 units on these streets, and they came back. They didn't break it out by, on this street, there's this number of kids, on that street, there's that number of kids. They came back and said, out of all of those 39 units, we have 3 students.
Coming from there? Okay.
Correct.
And that was the transportation director?
That's
who gave you
correct.
those. Do we have that list of properties in the record, other than through this testimony? Is there a separate exhibit, George? I don't recall.
I don't believe there was a separate exhibit, but it was in the testimony at pages, at
Okay.
April 30,
Six-
about
sorry.
page, starting at 68 and 69.
Okay, all right, I think Mr. Hetzel
Right.
repeated it tonight. Okay, that's all I.
I actually, before you jump in on that, but I feel like we're sort of really drilling down on this one. But I just heard you say, you looked at these townhomes, and there were 6 on this block and 3 on that one. Was that the entire neighborhood with 6 townhomes on that one block, or are you just parceling out pieces of a neighborhood just to get to the, to a sufficient amount of numbers?
That's the entire neighborhood.
Entire neighborhood. So
Correct.
you pulled together several neighborhoods because they're not as big as this one. So you had to go to multiple to get to the similar amount of units.
Yes, and just, I think a bigger sample size is going to be better. I mean, some of those may have none, and I don't think that would be an accurate representation either. A bigger sample size, I think, is
But you didn't go bigger than how big this neighborhood would be? One more. You went
I
one
didn't
more.
really identify any other units in the township that I felt,
Can you say those
similar to
streets
this.
again? I know you read them out.
yes. 11 units at Villa Stratford, 8 units at Wayne Walk, 6 units at Jardin, 8 units at Wicklow Court, and 6 units at Bloomingdale Avenue.
Thank you.
I would note also that when Mr. Lambert testified, we looked at those units for other characteristics, primarily the internal driveways.
Are you saying there's only 8 units at Wicklow Court?
That's what I had in my list, yes.
I'm not sure if that's, I'll give a look at that. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Marlier?
Similar line of questioning,
question.
just a couple questions. Do you remember who you spoke with at the Transportation Department?
Whoever the director of transportation is, the name escapes me.
And did you get anything in writing, or was this in a conversation?
I believe it was an email. I could be wrong. It might have just been a conversation. I emailed the list to them, and I can't remember if they replied with an email or if it was verbal.
Okay.
Okay.
Could I have a
Witness.
follow-up? You were asked by Mr. Marlier about, he's calling it Hamilton 1. I just wanted to clarify, we already have in the record A3, which was the prior adjudication. That application was submitted in September of 2020, is that correct?
That's what the adjudication says, yes.
So is it fair to assume you would have done your fiscal analysis for that sometime earlier that year in 2020?
Or I think I started in 2019, actually.
Right, and since then, there's been a significant increase in the market value of units like this?
That's been my observation.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Mr. Brosman, any more witnesses?
Not for my case in chief. I had one exhibit I would like to introduce.
Okay.
Sorry. I had mentioned, should I do that now or ask?
Sure.
I had mentioned to Mr. Marlier in going over my notes, I had put into the record Exhibit A3, which was the adjudication from 2020 on what Mr. Marlier calls Hamilton 1. I wanted to submit into the record the plan that was submitted for that. So there's been a lot of questions about what the differences are between that plan and this plan. And Mr. Marlier has even raised the issue of res judicata. And I wanted to have this in the record, so that would be in there. So we've marked as Exhibit A27 the plans from that application for the 41 townhomes. And I would just like to make that part of the record here to be go along with Exhibit A3, the adjudication.
Okay, let me just ask you about A27. Because there's no date on it, at least on the front page.
I could help you, Mr. Rice. A couple things. We've noted that the first page is former Exhibit A7 from the prior conditional use adjudication. That was an updated sheet at that time. It is dated in the bottom right-hand corner, August 21, 2020. And it had a revision date number 1 of December 8, 2020, revised layout.
Okay. And
And
you're
then-
offering this, Mr. Brosman, just to address the res judicata
Yes, and some other,
argument that this was the plan that was considered, was part of the application, and I'll call it Hamilton 1, too. Okay.
yeah, and just also that there's a second page that then has 15 sheets. That was the original full set, and it's noted there that that was Exhibit A4. From that, so just to be complete, we've submitted both. What happened was A7 was an update of A4 based on some review comments that had been received. So this is essentially the plans that related to that adjudication that was at Exhibit A3.
Okay.
Mr. Rice, I'd like to offer that we incorporate by reference the exhibits and the transcripts from Hamilton 1 into this record. I don't see why we wouldn't,
Well, let's
what the problem would be with doing that.
Because I've got to handle all the exhibits, and depending on who's unhappy, they've got to be put together and sent to court at the end of the day. So let's just, I don't see any issue with this. This is, it's a public record. Mr. Morlier, any questions about this in particular?
Again, I just raised the point about incorporating by reference the entire record, considering, I'm not opposed to A27 coming in, but there may be things in the record that belie some of the information in A27, and we wouldn't know it in this record if
Well,
it's only
let's-
A27
you'll-
in there.
You'll have an opportunity to rebut this if there's something else you want to add from that. But that was a fairly large record. I mean, there were several nights of testimony, as I recall, at least 4 or 5, and a lot of exhibits. And if we go incorporate this and there's some kind of an appeal down the road, then you're going to have this record and you're going to have this record, and it's going to go to a judge that has no idea what they're getting from Radnor Township. So I would keep it clean. as much as possible. And, you know, this will be A27 for purposes of this hearing, and if you or Mr. Brosman wants to add anything else from Hamilton 1, we can do that
Understood.
before we close, you know, the record. So the board's okay with that? Then, Mr. Brosman, anything else?
I don't know if now is the time to do it, but I would like to ask that my exhibits be made part of the record, and I'd like to reserve for rebuttal, but that is the end of my case in chief.
Okay. So all the exhibits will be admitted. And Mr. Morlier, you have a witness to
I do.
proceed? So I would suggest, let's take about 5 minutes, and
If we could just make it 10, I just got to set up a couple things on the
10?
screen.
Okay. 10 minutes?
Could I mention that I was asked at the prior proceedings to provide the name and the subject of all of my witnesses, which I did each time. I had asked Mr. Marlier for that, and I did not receive that. I just heard that he might have a land planning witness, so
Well,
I
look,
would like to get that information, and I feel a little that I would, you know, I'm maybe not as prepared as I might have liked to have been, since I had provided the same info to all the other parties.
I understand, Mr. Brosman, but you know as well as Mr. Morlier knows, there's no discovery in zoning matters. You know, so I don't know what the discussions have been between you and Mr. Morlier, but, you know, this type of proceeding happens all over the state. It's witnesses show up and you have to be prepared, assuming that there's witnesses coming in to testify.
And just to be clear for the record, I did, Mr. Brosman did ask, I did let him know that I would be calling a land planner. And I think that's
Yeah.
plenty sufficient
Yeah,
to let him know.
There's no rules here. I understand a complaint, but let's take the 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I
we'll-
just wanted to say, I appreciate that, but I was specifically asked many times to give the names and the topic of the area of expertise, and I did do that. I gave that to the board and all the parties, so.
And I
I
would just,
understand I wasn't obligated to do that, but I was asked to, and I did do that.
and I would just say that my case in chief is starting now. I had, I understood that there probably was only going to be one more witness, but I had no idea where Mr. Brosman's case was actually going to go, and it could have gone in a very different direction. Who knows? Now that it's closed, I have a witness, and we're ready to go.
Okay.
May I add, just because I said I would check, there are, in fact, 8 townhomes in Wicklow Court. Wicklow Court.
Okay, let's go off the record and take our 10 minutes. Thank you.
Oh.
It's going to be tough with the setup. If we have the microphone, we can. Here, can we come up here for a second and check out? So, what we're looking for. A12, I think. So, and what pages are we?
I'm gonna look at, sheet 4,
Yeah, that's the main one.
and then,
The back for the stormwater stuff. Yep. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you can't, Norma, just let me know. We'll figure something out. Should we, I guess we could switch. We all come down here. I would rather not be standing. It's going to be for an hour and a half, and I got it. Okay. Hey. Gotcha. Hey, George. You think you can move her?
Why don't you just, I mean, I'm happy to move whatever is easier.
Or unless you guys wanted to.
We can shift over. That's fine. George, this is when I found out you've had the nicest chair the whole time.
The witness gets
The witness
this.
gets
I don't
that.
get that. I get
Well,
one
I'm
of
taking
those.
it.
I don't get one of those.
I mean, I just have to move my laptops down. I think I can get up to do that. Yeah, I just don't feel like standing. If she sits here, are you gonna be okay? be close to you guys, George. Golda, we're gonna switch over. Totally throw me off my game, George. We're gonna start agreeing with each other on everything. I was gonna take here,
Okay.
just to be closer to the computers. That's right, we're switching sides. George, was this what you showed your?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yep. Just don't think we have a microphone. Ready? They're going to be on it.
Okay, we're going to begin with Mr. Morlier's case in chief. And you have a witness, Mr. Morlier?
I do have a witness, Mr. Rice. I would call Golda Spire.
Okay, let's have Ms. Spire sworn in.
Would you like me to stand?
No, that's fine. Just
Okay.
raise your right hand. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And state your full name, please.
My name is Golda Spire, spelled Golda, last name spelled Speyer.
Right off the bat, I'd like to have Ms. Spire's CV marked as, I guess, Township 1 T1, if I could. And I'll pass out copies.
That's my water bottle. Left my water.
Ms. Spire, could you, for the board, just describe your educational and professional background?
Sure. So, just reading off my own resume. Professionally, I'm a planner, a principal planner at my company. We're a land use planning firm called Topology. I do very high level oversee land use and supervise a team of land use planners as well. I deal a lot with operations in my firm as well, and I'm in charge of preparing staff reports, look at zoning codes, prepare technical reports, look at site plans, conditional uses, things of that nature. If there's variances from zoning codes, how to navigate zoning codes, prepare professional reports for various bodies, including courts, councils such as this, and largely planning and zoning boards. Prior to that, I was working in the public sector, actually. I still do, even though I'm on the private sector, I still do a lot of service for the public sector, but there was a time where I was actually a public sector employee. I used to work for the city of Jersey City in New Jersey, as well as the city of New Brunswick. That's where actually Rutgers is located. And I did a lot of community development and zoning administration work for those two cities when I worked for them, and oversaw a bit of land use as well in those processes around big development and zoning and codes and land ordinances and funding and things of that nature. So that's somewhat my professional background. My educational background, I have my master's in city and regional planning from Rutgers. I'm a two-time Rutgers graduate. I also have my bachelor's in planning and public policy, and dual, if it matters, a dual major in political science. But what kind of distinguishes me is my licensure. I have 3 accreditations. One of them is the American Institute of Certified Planners. That's a nationally recognized certification through the American Planning Association. The other one I am a licensed planner in the state of New Jersey. I note that Pennsylvania doesn't have such a license in existence. Otherwise, I'd love to get one. But I do throw that out there because the work I do under that license is similar at looking at codes. I've looked at codes in New York as well. There's some parallels with that work. And then last year, actually, I became a certified project manager. So I don't know if that's really relevant to my expertise here tonight, but it was a hard test, so I like to talk about it if I can. And then I have various technical skills in planning, looking at zoning codes, do a lot of geographic information systems, they call it GIS, look at mapping and zoning mapping and neighborhood context, and I've prepared zoning maps that have been adopted before, as well as various land use maps. And then I have a couple of other certificates, through the Rutgers Continuing Education, just courses in zoning administration.
And what kind of expert testimony will you be giving this evening?
So tonight, my focus is going to be mostly about zoning, analyzing the zoning code of Radnor, the conditional use, as well as the zoning code of, so the general zoning code, and then what we have here is a conditional use, which has its own section in the zoning code. So I think that's where my expertise will be.
And have you been recognized by an expert in other municipalities?
I have, yes.
About how many?
Maybe like 30. I've done it
And have
both
you,
public and private, where I've represented clients on the private side, kind of on the other side of this table, and then I've done it on behalf of municipalities as well.
would you say roughly an even split?
Probably more municipality, way more municipality.
But
I would
also
say probably 2/3 municipality, maybe 1/3 private.
And have you reviewed applications such as the one that's before this board currently?
I have. I've reviewed conditional uses. I've reviewed multifamily development, new construction, similar to the density and the acreage, such as the application that's being proposed.
And have you been recognized by an expert by a municipality in Pennsylvania?
I have, yes.
And is your knowledge of land planning, and you touched on this a little bit, but your knowledge of land planning transferable from New Jersey to Pennsylvania?
I would say yes. It's very common to see the same, they call it ecode.com. I think that's what Radnor is also using. It's very common to see kind of the same structure, while I'll say zoning codes are obviously tailored to a municipality. You know, you have your permitted uses, conditional uses, prohibited uses, your variance, dimensionals, standards such as setbacks, coverages, design standards, things of that nature. If there's conditions, what are those conditions? I would say that framework seems to carry from zoning code to zoning code.
And has the township retained you to testify this evening
It has.
and to review documents in this conditional use hearing?
It has.
And this time, Mr. Rice, I'd offer Golda Spire as an expert in land use planning.
Yes, could I ask some questions? Ms. Spire?
You got one arm.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Spire. My name is George Brosman. I'm the attorney for the applicant here. I just had some questions for you. When you said you, in your company, I think you're responsible for operations.
Mm-hmm.
Do I take that to mean that's like reviewing business type operations, not necessarily zoning?
I can clarify. So last year I got my project management license, and so what I do kind of operationally with my company is, you know, we have a finance team. I don't really mess with the finances, but how do we bridge the gap between the planners and what kind of naturally happens as a business? And using my project management skills lately on how to train new planner, or lowest planners, maybe we call them planner ones, the lowest staff members, how to train them to, you know, review codes. So that kind of operations, training planners, how to look at a site plan, what's a lighting plan, what does a lighting fixture, like what does this mean if this happens on a site plan? So kind of, maybe I use the word operations, I would say more high-level training.
Okay.
And bridging it together with the other side of operations, the business side.
And you talked about the mix between your municipal work and private client or developer work. 2/3 for municipalities, you said?
That was just yes. My point is I do more municipality than private.
Right. How many plans have you prepared that, for development?
That I've prepared?
Yes.
I don't prepare plans. I will say I'm not a licensed architect or a licensed engineer, but I've reviewed and I'm trained to know how to review such plans, but I don't
Understood.
prepare.
Land planners do prepare site plans at times, correct?
I wouldn't always advise that, but they could.
But you
Some rules
haven't
allow
prepared
them.
any?
I've done like conceptual plans, but only for like due diligence. Hey, here are the bulk requirements. Here's the land. We can pull a survey. We can kind of measure setbacks, and we can kind of look at topography a little bit and look at constraints on the land where there's maybe steep slopes or environmental constraints that, make this area really undevelopable. But ultimately, it becomes evolved of a product of, I would say, like an engineer, civil.
And what are the plans that you prepared, did this conceptual work for? What are those projects?
I've done concept plans for like parking lots that have been trying to expand. We do a lot of redevelopment reports and projects, which are, taking the zone, it's essentially a rezoning, and looking at that land and what could conceptually go there, working with architects. So I would say these are more illustrative.
And what are I'm asking the specific projects.
Mixed use.
Like the actual project, the property, like the location, the name of the project.
Like specifically?
Yes.
I know recently I worked on a concept plan in Elmsford, New York. We have Keurig Dr. Pepper was a client of ours, and they were looking at a parking lot expansion, and our team looked at like the existing parking lot and what the setbacks are, and there were a lot of nuances in their ordinance that it couldn't be 10 feet, to a building, and it had to have a 10-foot buffer from a road. So we were kind of plugging in all these little requirements of the code and then mocking up, again, this isn't of civil engineering quality, but mocking up concepts of what can you kind of build, because as we know, it's very expensive to retain some professionals to prepare full-blown plans, and doing a little bit of a scrub of the zoning code very early just to look at some basic requirements, basic setbacks, looking at your land and conditions. You can sometimes kind of mock up a little bit of a box. Hey, do we want to take this further and, retain civil, or is this site going to be very difficult and challenging? And then we'll advise, it's more advisory to clients.
Understood. I understand. I'm just trying to get a list of specific projects and properties. Is that the only one you can give me?
That one.
That you've done the plan for, the concept plan?
That one just comes to my mind just because it wasn't too long ago. That's the only one that's coming to my mind right now.
Okay. You were asked, you were qualified in a Pennsylvania municipality. Which was that?
Jenkinstown.
Is that the only one?
That is the only one, yes.
And what role were you there?
I was there looking at their zoning code, and there was a challenge by a client of ours as to the zoning code and if it was drafted in a way that rendered, it was like a spot zoning question. So you could zone for something and then add conditions, and that it has to be buffered so much from certain locations. And once you start mapping that out, it turned out, our findings was that it turned out to be just one parcel was only allowed in the town, and that caused a legal question from there. So our firm was to look at the zoning code and kind of draw up some buffer maps and provide that testimony.
What property or project was that?
It was a billboard case. I don't remember the exact property at the top of my head.
And you were working for the billboard company?
Our client was, yes. It was a billboard company.
Did the billboard get built?
I don't know.
So that was the only time you've been recognized as an expert in Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania, yes.
And what board were you in front of for that?
I was in front of the commissioners, the town commissioners.
Okay. And your planning work, can you tell us what other Pennsylvania planning work you've done?
Specific to Pennsylvania, that case was my Pennsylvania case. A lot of my work has been in New Jersey, looking at site plans and advising planning and zoning boards as it relates to different types of variances, different types of degree of variances, looking at site plans and evaluating it against the metrics of the zoning code objectively, and advising the bodies what an intent of a code may be, if it's in violation, what is the negative impacts that may be associated with it, just guidance to these members of these commissions, to maybe implement certain conditions of approval in those cases. But it's a zoning. It's similar to what I'm kind of looking at here, is looking at a lot of the zoning code.
What did you say? I missed that.
Looking at the zoning code and
Okay.
looking at like the black and white text of what it says, and then also looking at maybe the intent of what it means, especially when there's conditional uses or deviations from uses or densities or, heights or things like that.
That's all I have at this time.
Just real quick follow-up.
Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Brosman asked you a couple questions about site design or plans that you prepared. Just to be clear, how many plans roughly have you reviewed?
I've reviewed probably over 200 plans.
And Mr. Brosman asked you about your experience here in Pennsylvania, but again, you have certain national accreditations, correct?
I do.
And it's your testimony here in Vardir that what you have done, a majority of in New Jersey, admittedly, is transferable to the types of things that we're looking at in this case, correct?
Correct.
I have no questions, no further questions.
Any objection to this witness being qualified as an expert in English?
Not at this time. I may have objection to her testimony later, but not as.
Well, that's different.
I would note she has almost no experience in Pennsylvania, but that's been brought out of the record.
Right. Okay. Then Ms. Spire will be accepted as a expert in the field of land use planning.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. May I proceed?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Spire, there's been a lot of testimony in this case, a lot of exhibits, so I'd start off by asking what you have reviewed in preparation for your testimony this evening.
So I've reviewed the conditional use application from the applicant, and there's been a series of exhibits that have evolved over time. I've looked at Radnor's comprehensive plan, which I can speak to kind of as I get into my testimony more, because I think there's some relevant points as to why the comprehensive plan is probably important to think about with certain aspects of this application. I've looked at the Radnor's Chapter 280 zoning ordinance, and I've reviewed some relevant portions of the transcripts when it comes to some discussions around the kind of like the site.
At this time, let me ask you, have you produced a report based on your review of these documents and this testimony?
I have. I've drafted a report, a planning report, based on my analysis.
I'm going to pass you what I'm going to mark as T2. Is this the report that you've prepared for this conditional use hearing?
Yes.
I'd like to mark this document as T2. Mr. Rice, I have copies for the entire board as well as Mr. Brosman.
What's that?
Is our tech guy, off the record, is our tech guy still around? We can maybe put this up on the screen. Our tech guy, it's a technical term. I'll certainly email these to Peggy Hagan also tomorrow, Commissioner. Ms. Spire, if you can explain for the board, this is a number of pages long. Could you explain how your report is broken down?
Sure. So, no pun intended, but it is a dense report. So, kind of keeping in practice, I like to offer planning guidance in a very objective way. So what this report does is it takes what was my regulatory review of the zoning and conditional use development, and it puts it into writing. And what it does is it looks at high-level zoning of the site, and then it goes through what this applicant is proposing as a conditional use, and what those conditions are, and what the consistency or inconsistency against the conditional use requirements are, as I see it. It takes a look at the zoning ordinance, because there's really, two parts of the code here that we're looking at, which is one is the conditional use code and one is the zoning code. So I'll specify that further momentarily. But what it does is it explains intent, I think, of codes, using comprehensive plan and using language right from the Radnor code when it has sections that speak to meaning. So what I mean by that is it's not sometimes as black and white, hey, here's a standard, do you follow it or not? Sometimes within the code, it will say, the objective of the moderate density development is XYZ. And so you can read some of these things that, while it might not be like a metric to compare to in like a zoning, bulk dimensional chart, there is intent guidance there to think about, and I think it's important for the commission to think about. And then finally, this report will go over some of the findings of the comprehensive plan as I reviewed it.
And if you could, Ms. Spire, briefly explain to the commissioners what is unique about conditional uses in the review process.
Sure. So,
and just to be clear, Ms. Spire, if there's anything you're reading from your report or kind of testifying off your report, I can go to the page so that all the neighbors can see where that is as well.
yeah, maybe before I answer that question, I'll just show this page real quick because it's really easy just to pass this one. I think we know this is the R4 district. It's the low, medium density residential. And so what we have here are your permitted uses, your special exception uses, and conditional uses. So I think we've called these townhomes. The word I'm going to try to stick with is density modification development, because that's the word, that's the use of the zoning code. That's how it describes it as one of the conditional uses. So when I say density modification development, I'm talking about this development. So I'm just trying to get my vernacular out there. So maybe it helps to go to page 3 at this point. But the question was about, like, what is unique about conditional use applications? And it's really why we're at this body, the council, the commissioners. As I said, this density modification development is one of the conditional uses in the R4. And in other words, it means that there should be a heightened regulatory review process, and that this review process is what brings us to this body, and this body should look at it to make sure that we're following all sound planning and necessary safeguards, and we're avoiding, any substantial negative impacts that might hit the community, because this isn't one of those uses that just goes by right or site plan. It comes here first because there's a bit of a intensification or there was something about this use that the commissioners, at one point, I don't know if it's literally this group of commissioners, but at some point, the commissioners of Radnor said this type of use needs to be brought here as a conditional use for an added layer of review. And that really comes from Radnor's own code, where it talks about what the Board of Commissioners' role is. And that's, if you want a particular section number, 280-134, maybe we'll scroll back down, up there, but if you want to scroll down, actually. So the italics, what you're reading is just from the code itself, and it speaks to what the Board of Commissioners' role is. And really, in summation, it's what I explained. It's that, not every site may be appropriate for such a conditional use, and that's why this process exists. And that really it's the sole discretion of the Board of Commissioners to ensure that we're complying or that the standards are appropriate, or may be deemed a basis for denial, or for the imposition of or appropriate conditions upon a grant of approval. I know I kind of word jammed that in. I was trying to read the code, but let me re-say that. So what I'm saying is that the code is speaking to the intent of this body and looking at the standards, and that this board has the ability to actually even reject applications if there is, if the record's clear that there is not a compliance with the conditional use. So I think that the Board of Commissioners should follow the standards, as prescribed in your own code when it comes to evaluating and acting upon this application. And that's, I think, what makes it a unique process, is this conditional use process.
And would you say that health, safety, and welfare is something that the board should be looking at?
Absolutely. That's kind of always like the big intent of zoning, is health, safety, and welfare, and to protect it.
So why don't we move to this specific application, if you would, Ms. Spire. That brings us here this evening. What are your general thoughts, and we'll drill down deeper, but what are your general thoughts about this application?
Sure. So reviewing the applicant's plan and reviewing their consistency with the conditional use, I think there's a couple of items that either need further clarification or might be considered variances from the conditional use that should at least have discussion by this board, or that the Board of Commissioners should have the ability to review, hear it, and hear maybe further testimony if they need more clarification. So there's three things with the conditional uses requirements that I found. I'm just going to start with two low-hanging ones that I think maybe even the applicant could clarify, and then I want to get into something a little bigger that I think we should probably have a discussion about, which is more around the open space, which I have my objective questions myself. But to just talk about some quick ones that the commissioners might want to think about or get more information on. I myself, I'm still having a hard time confirming certain conditional use compliance based on my review of this application when it comes to certain things about the project's design when it comes to height, for example. One of the conditions is that a maximum of 35 feet is permitted. As far as I could see in the materials, it seems very limited in architectural renderings. I'm not even sure if the renderings supplied were just general renderings or if it was this site particular on Stratford. I usually see height in elevations, floor-to-floor heights, with consideration of the roof peak. And if we've looked at the Radnor definition of height, it's still a question, I think. Are we complying with 35 feet maximum? So I think it's a fair question to still think about if this is an open-ended compliance item, because this directly goes not to just the zoning code, but the conditional use requirements.
So in other words, Ms. Spire, there may have been testimony as to the height, but you're talking about the application itself.
And maybe there has been, I call it a bulk table, it could be a dimensional table. But essentially the dimensions requirement, here's your setback, here's your coverage, here's your height. It's very easy to toss height into that, just general bulk table, dimension table. But here in the conditional use standards, height is one of the conditions. So I think clarification is probably warranted considering that this is the Board of Commissioners that's being charged with overseeing the conditional use. The other one is also what I think is kind of more low-hanging at the moment, which is just townhome design, about how each townhome must have at least one plan element on the floor which projects and recedes within the wall plane of the facade of a minimum dimension of 2 feet. Again, this is limited in architectural details at the moment. The purpose of that type of regulation is so that you don't have a long, expansive wall, and that there's, these are I know I said I'd stick to my vernacular of density modification development, but for the buildings of the townhomes and the multifamily, they're wider, and so I think that type of regulation gets put in so that there's a little bit of articulation here. So I don't know if that has actually been provided at this time, but it is one of the conditional requirements. But then if I was to kind of get into a more larger component about one of the conditional use requirements and intent around this density modification development, it really comes down to this whole clause, which is written within the density modification development intent section about open space and preserving it and encouraging conservation and the use of open space in new residential development. And what I can do next, if it helps the record, is I can read exactly what the conditions say.
I think for
and
this
then
one,
give my
if you could read the
interpretation.
ordinance, that'd be great.
Okay.
The ordinance section, please.
So if you want to read along, there is a table in the back of this report. Starting on page 11. I don't know if you want to scroll the... Page 11. So yeah, right here. So what this table does is it takes the conditional use standards around this development, and it's basically a chart. What is the requirement and what are they proposing? But also discussion about intent of the code. So the first one about open space requirements, it speaks to not less than 25% of the track area shall be designated in the subdivision or development plan as common open space. Common open space may not include the required buffer yards, floodplain, or wetlands. No more than 10% of the required common open space may be used to meet the plan's stormwater management requirements, and all required common open space shall be contiguous unless the Board of Commissioners approve otherwise. So to unpack that a little bit, 25% is required, whereas there's like a 10% allowance underground if there's going to be stormwater infrastructure. You can put up to 10% of your requirement in a man-made underground infrastructure. So going off the plans and the zoning charts, what applicants proposing is 7.9% of the open space will be stormwater. So that, that's under the allowance. What is still a little unclear to me is, and this is probably where I might turn to the applicant's Exhibit A12. So starting with this plan, the open space proposed is the dark green. And if you zoom in, or I have a, does this work? Yep. So it highlights areas that are going to be infiltration beds. I don't know if you want to zoom in just so we can clearly see that it says that.
Not sure. You're putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
Let's see if we can zoom
So infiltration bed number 2. The other one I think says infiltration bed. Some back there, infiltration bed. But that's kind of what I'm getting in terms of the details.
And what you're referring to with your laser pointer, Ms. Spire, is the hashed lines in rectangles to the left of Townhome 25 and the hashed line of rectangle to the right of Townhome 28, correct?
Correct. So if you were to turn to the construction drawings, I don't know if it's like, I don't know the exact page number, but maybe like 6 or 7 here.
This is still in A12?
It's still in the same exhibit. Yes, but now I'm going to ask you to zoom out.
Yeah, you bet.
So what I see are details referring to the infiltration beds, but what I also see are a lot of other stormwater type details. So I would just like some clarity, if you want to now move it to the left a little bit, just to show like all these construction details.
And just to be clear, we're still looking at A12, and this is sheet.
I think it's sheet 7, I think.
But it is Exhibit A12.
It's the same
we can figure out
exhibit on the construction details. Just to ensure that, and I think it might even go on to the next page, but we have different types of, you know, utility trenches. There's more, it seems to be more construction details than just infiltration beds. If you want to scroll down, it may carry over to the next page too.
This looks like sheet 7.
You say it's sheet 7, Mr. Rice. Thank you.
So I just would want, you know, if I was a planner reviewing this and kind of giving my own planning notes, I'd want some confirmation, you know, is that all within the infiltration bed? Is that more details and more construction details? All these other infrastructure, are they going to be within that 25% area? Just to get really an accurate accounting by this board.
In other words, what we're looking at, the stormwater facilities in applicant's Exhibit A12, the stormwater facilities that are shown on these sheets, your concern is that some of them may not be within the hashed rectangles that we were looking at on sheet 4, and therefore there may be some of these facilities that underneath the open space that would create a higher percentage of stormwater facilities in the open space, correct?
Or it's at least unclear, or I think we would want more information to confirm that.
Understood.
So moving on to the next condition, common open space shall be land which is appropriate and suitable condition for recreation, park sites, school grounds, woodland conservation, or other similar recreation or open space purpose. So I know that this is not the only exhibit at this point, and that there's one with a circular path from the applicant. I don't know exactly which exhibit that one is anymore, but it is by their landscape architect. But what it depicts, I'll just describe it. It depicts the open space that seems to be pretty limited in programming. It's really just a 4-foot path that kind of circles within itself. Otherwise, there really is a lack of kind of any features to really use, like benches or picnic tables or pergolas or any kind of playground equipment or anything like that. So kind of going back to the stormwater question, ensuring that we have all the information on all those construction details so that we're not interfering with certain footings if certain permanent structures want to be put into place. I think that should be clarified on the plan. But what's probably the more concerning in terms of like intent is that I think that there's this number that we're talking about, 25% open space, but then how much of this is really usable? And what I put together was an exhibit kind of within my report. So I guess my whole report's an exhibit. But if you go to Appendix B in my report, what I did was I annotated the site plan up a little bit. And, compared it to what kind of might actually be really used at this space in real life based off of, spatial distance from certain roads and the main road and the drive aisle and the parking spaces and privacy concerns of the houses. What I mean by that is, we might be at the 25% technically, but in reality, I think what might really be occurring is you got, here where I labeled it Part A on this annotated version of their Exhibit 12, you have areas that are right up against the drive aisle, right up against, a road that has no sidewalk, that in reality, I don't think people are going to be sitting or using that space, especially with kids or animals so close to what is an active drive lane.
And just to be clear, Ms. Spire, we're now back on our exhibit
Yes.
T2, and we're on the Appendix B. And what you're pointing at is you have lettered, put letters onto the applicant's proposed development, indicating certain areas on the development, and specifically in the open space, correct?
Correct.
And you were just pointing to the 2As, kind of more towards the bottom, again, next to Townhome. I believe that's 25 and 28.
Yeah, above 21, closer to where the road bends on this drive aisle A, on both bottom parts, and then up above Townhome 32. These areas are, maybe they're literally counting in the 25 percentile, but when it comes to the condition about programming and contiguous use and appropriate and suitable condition is actually what the code language says exactly. I don't know how suitable these little areas become in counting towards this requirement. Then what I have here, which is...
I'm sorry, Ms. Spire, when you say you don't know, do you have...
What I mean by I don't know is I know, and that is they're not. It's probably less likely that areas right adjacent to drive aisles and roads and the parking spaces are going to have the users want to have some sort of buffer and setback from those spaces for safety reasons. And so
if we look at the A in the top left corner, it's surrounded by Drive A and by Stratford and by a townhome. I believe that's Townhome 21, correct?
Correct. And then what I was going to point out for B, what I have hatched around, again, this is not to scale, I should point that out. It's for illustrative demonstration. But what's within B and hatched around the townhomes I'm trying to demonstrate that it's probably less likely that someone's going to use open space right against someone's house. It's pretty awkward. I don't want to be in someone's backyard right against their window when I'm hanging out with, my dog or something. I'm going to want to get away from that, and the people in the house is probably going to want the people to get away from their house. So in essence, these also become somewhat of like dead spaces, not dead spaces. They serve as buffers, which is great, allow for pervious coverage and buffers. But to say that it's usable open space is a little bit ludicrous to me. And then coupled with you got spaces right here that are, as you said, surrounded by Stratford, right against Drive Aisle B with no sidewalk, right adjacent to, someone's place of residence. You're starting to like close this box into what is really just kind of the square in the center where letter D is. And that kind of becomes your real overall space, which then becomes more limited. And as of now, it's depicted with a circular path, not on this plan. I think it's on their landscape architect plan. But, what also becomes a little problematic with having these units kind of situated this way is then I think a self-burden kind of becomes created in that, like, you're not going to see play equipment or certain types of things there because then it generates noise, it generates nuisance to residents. But I would almost say that that's self-created, right, because of the way this got designed out. So not only are you limiting your open space to this small little area, you got to now respect, the noise against the residents that are right there as well, so that you're not, having kids play and catch ball and screaming, and now the resident is annoyed because there's screaming kids in their backyard.
So if we could break it down this way and tell me if this is fair, the 4 letters that you have on there, the 4 A's,
Yep.
Those are areas within the open space that are more adjacent to either roads, Stratford, or what they're calling drives, and townhomes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct? Sorry.
Say it one more time.
Sure. The 4 A's, they're either adjacent to Stratford or what they're calling drives, Drive A or Drive B, and also adjacent to townhomes.
Correct.
And then what you've labeled as B are the areas hashed out that are very close to the townhomes, but being considered as open space, correct?
Correct.
And what would C be?
Right, I almost forgot C. So within the open space requirements, it allows you, I wouldn't say allows, it sets a metric that 30 feet from the property line must be a buffer. So what that means is you can't count, the first 30 feet towards your open space because it's contemplating something like this, that, from the property line, you don't want to have something so close to the property line be counted as your open space because that's inactive space likely. And if you look at their property survey, their property line actually starts in the center of Stratford. I don't know exactly what the exact dimension is, if it's 10 feet or 15 feet, but what this means is rather than 30 feet from, you think of a property line, you tend to think of like the sidewalk, right? But technically, because that property line is extending way more into the right-of-way, it artificially makes their buffer lower, kind of to their benefit. So I think putting this all together, what we're doing is we're losing some contiguous space and programmable space by designing this in a way where you have all these areas that are unusable, and then we're kind of artificially getting to count certain areas as part of the percentage because you get the benefit of that property line being further into the street rather than to the face of that sidewalk. So it's more square footage that gets to count on the applicant towards their 25%.
Understood.
I know that was kind of a complicated one. I'm happy to answer if that one went over some people's heads.
Sure, sure. So if you, could you speak also to the contiguous nature of whether, in your opinion, this is contiguous in spirit, if not as defined?
No, in fact, I would go back to, I think it was like page 4 of my memo. So the top part? Maybe the prior page. Maybe it's page 3. Yeah, page 3. Top page 3.
We'll get there.
Sorry. So something I always look for are definitions. And I looked for the definition in Radnor's code for density modification development. One did not exist. So what I am leaning on is when you turn to the whole chapter and the conditions and the requirements of the density modification development, it has a objective and interpretation section in the zoning code, or in the conditional use code, which is also the zoning code, in the overall land use code. And I don't think it's an accident that this conditional use around the open space was so specific. And it really shows here in the objectives and interpretation part of this conditional use, and I'm going to read this one too from the code. It is the intent of this article to provide for modification of lot area, yard, and use requirements in certain zoning districts in connection with single-family dwelling development for the purposes of accomplishing the following objectives. 1, to encourage conservation and use of open space in new residential development. 2, to encourage land development which preserves trees and natural topography, prevents soil erosion, and promotes the best interests of the township from the aesthetic, ecological, and natural resource standpoint. And 3, to attract arrangements of dwellings by permitting the design and layout of dwellings to be closely related to physical characteristics of the site in harmony with its surrounding tracts. So just seeing that this is, one of number ones in the objective interpretation within the description of talking about this modification development, to answer your question about the contiguous use, they sometimes say things are open for interpretation. I think this kind of speaks in that there is a pretty clear objective here, that this these open space conditions and making it programmable and activated and usable was very much contemplated. And to see it break up that way seems to be hurting the integrity of what the code was aiming to do.
And broken up, when you say broken up that way?
Broken up and designed in a way where the reality is a lot of the sections are probably going to be really not usable based on how it is designed out. And then I didn't get to it yet, but it's probably redundant to everything I've kind of said at this point, but there's 2 more conditions around open space in the conditional use requirements, and that is consideration shall be given to the arrangement and location of common open space to take advantage of physical characteristics of the site and to place common open space with easy access and view of dwelling units, at the same time preserving and enhancing natural features. Areas set aside for common open space shall contain no structure other than a structure related to outdoor recreational use. And then the last one, common open space within the meaning of this article shall consist of a parcel or parcels of land or an area of water or a combination of land and water within a development site designed and intended for the use or enjoyment of residents of the development or the public, not including streets, off-street parking areas, and areas set aside for public facilities.
Can we just go back to the first one? You read that the advantage of open space is to take advantage of physical characteristics of the site and to place common open space within easy access and view of dwelling units. Do the dwelling units, and we've gone back to your Appendix B, do all the dwelling units have view of the open space?
I would say not all of them do. So, there's some across drive aisle A, and I think some of these dwelling units are probably block some. So I can't read this number. Is it like 5 and 6, for example, and 35, 34? So some of the interior units of some of the dwellings across the street seem to just straight face the other buildings. And so that would be probably a violation of that condition as well, yes.
And regarding easy access, you may have read the testimony, but there will be no sidewalk on the inner loop of what they're calling Drive A and Drive B, what the applicant's calling Drive A and Drive B. Would that make it more easily accessible if there was a sidewalk on that side?
Oh, very much so.
It talks about in the first section that you read, talks about any structures put into this open space must be related to outdoor recreational use. Is there any outdoor recreational use structures proposed here?
So this plan doesn't show that, and I believe a circular path is all that's given, which I wouldn't call that a structure. So from what I've reviewed, no.
Is there any, is there any concerns that you have if down the line there were to be a pergola put in or a gazebo, playground equipment?
So I guess going back to the stormwater question, which is kind of a question right now, is it really all shown on the plan? They need to probably show how it is on the plan. It could very well not be in this area, but I don't know if we have that information right now. And that would impede footings, of course, to have that underneath. But to answer your question about, pergolas and benches and structures like that, it's not in the design that's shown to me right now, so I haven't really, looked at it that way because it's just simply not even proposed at this point.
You mentioned a few minutes ago some of this open space is very close. It runs right abuts some of the townhomes, specifically 21 through 24, 25 through 28, and 29 through 32. If there was playground equipment put, let's say, within the hash marks of B behind Townhome 21, would you have concerns about that?
So, yeah, we would have to kind of almost think of it like accessory structures and how they get regulated with setbacks. And I see often accessory structures need to be set back from certain buildings. So we are playing a regulation game in that, how far back is the appropriate, suitable for certain types of accessory structures like playgrounds, especially when you have backyards and side yards.
And looking at
houses right there.
Ms. Spire, looking at the spirit of this, if there were kids playing outdoors right next to someone's home, the townhome, the backyard, which there are no backyards shown on this plan, but the back of the house, you mentioned a few minutes ago about noise and people running around in close proximity to people's houses. Would that be a concern as well? Just from a living perspective?
Yeah, it would be annoying.
Right.
Yeah, because I think what you have is a site plan, and then you're adding stuff later that isn't even contemplating in this site plan at the moment. So like, can I say I'm concerned? I don't know if the land use board or the board of commissioners could be concerned because it's just not even on this plan. And it would be awkward to put certain structures within these yards against these houses.
In reviewing the applicant's plan as presented with their conditional use application, what, if any, zoning variances need further clarification?
Right, so I was saying there's a whole conditional use chapter. So then there's also just the general zoning code and complying with the zoning code. Based on my review, I see two requirements that I think more information is needed, whether that's showing it on the plans or clarifying it in testimony with plan details, perhaps. The first one is around parking. The zoning requirement here is that 2 spaces per dwelling unit is required, so that would be 76 spaces in total. What is proposed now are these 5 spaces here, and then
You're pointing down to the, towards the bottom right of the open space between B and A on our Exhibit T2, correct?
correct.
The Appendix B.
Correct. So these 5 spaces here, and I believe the garages were what were proposed to be parking. Where have questions, or what I would say is open-ended or to be confirmed, is what's required in a parking space is that they need to be 9.5 by 20 feet by the ordinance. I haven't seen any exhibit with floor plans showing the garage spaces, how big these garages are. And then when you're not putting them in, a 9.5, 20-foot space on a parking lot and you're putting them in the garage, then you need to start thinking about the other stuff that's in the garage. So your trash and your bikes. And so maybe the requirement's 9.5 by 20 feet, but then, okay, if you're going to put it in the garage, do you have ample space for, simple home things that typically go in our garages, especially things like trash, things like a clear path in and out of garages. It's very common to open the garage and just need to get in and out. So I think a floor plan that's a little bit more accurate with square footages and dimensions can clarify that better. But as of now, it's unclear. And I know that some of the driveways here are a little undersized, so the requirement is 20 feet. So looking at some of these driveways, some of them are right at 20 feet. So does that mean that they kind of, literally right to the face of no one's going to park right touching their garage door. So they're going to need to, kind of be back a foot from the garage door. So does it start overhanging into the sidewalk in those scenarios? So I think a little clarity around that and site plan around that is important to know. Then the other one is loading here. A loading space, so this one's pretty objective. It's simple. 5,000 square feet or more requires a loading space. I don't see one labeled here. Amazon is a thing, but also not just Amazon, like moving in and moving out, and things to consider about that. And also just kind of jumping back to the parking and then coming back to the loading is if you start having parties and parking, taking up these drive aisles, where does the Amazon loading person start? Is he starting to get blocked because people are parked in this driveway? Because are we meeting the parking? So just general questions around those zoning requirements.
And those questions regarding parking, regarding loading, and kind of the interplay between the two potentially, does that bring up health, safety, and welfare
I would
concerns?
say absolutely, yes. Traffic is usually always the biggest public health safety question that seems to come up a lot, but amongst other things, but yes.
If we could just go off the record, Mr. Rice, for just a moment. Mr. Rice, if we could just go off the record for just a moment. I have a number of questions about comprehensive plans. I see we're at 9 o'clock. Just wanted to know what the feel of the board was to continue, or if we want to pick up at the next hearing.
Even if we extend to 9:30, we're not going to be done with this witness, so.
There would be no way to be done with the witness. I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine that. We would have have cross, which I'm sure Mr. Brosman's champion at the bit, and then we would have the neighbors as well. And the commissioner's questions.
So this is a natural break.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm raising it. I think it's a natural break for me. I have a number of other questions, but it's a new
But we're
New
up to
topic.
The comp plan testimony. and-
Correct.
and that's, okay. Okay. So let's just stay off the record. We'll end for tonight, and we need to pick some more dates, or at least one more date.
Yeah. Calendar.
I believe we'd have to go into September based on my witnesses. Well, there's only 2 more weeks in August, but my witnesses were not available, or I wasn't for the rest of this month, yeah.
Okay. So I guess we're missing, Peggy has the schedule for the meeting room. So I don't know how to access that. She keeps that schedule.
Ian, do you happen to know room usage in the Radnor Shire room?
He's like Oz.
Yeah, he can hear.
You have it? Great. Sorry. Do you mind just sitting with us for a minute, and we're trying to come up with another date.
So Ian, do you have dates that the room's open in September?
Thursday, September 5th.
Let somebody else go, George. All right, that's, Mr. Brosman has a conflict.
Tuesday, September 17th.
September 17th.
That's good for my witness, and that's good for me.
Mr. Brosman? Okay. You'll be away, 17th. Okay, well, yeah, let's announce it tonight, so.
And there was nothing the week before, Ian, that week of the 9th through the 13th?
Let me double check. I don't think there
Thank
was.
you. Sorry.
Nothing that week before.
So the commissioners meet in September on the 9th and the 23rd? Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
September 26th is also available.
So we have the 17th and we have the 26th.
Which is a Thursday.
Pardon me?
A Thursday.
Maybe we should snag both of them.
Yeah, in case we have to cancel one. Pardon me, George?
I would be out, I'm out of town on the 26th.
Taking a lot of vacation, George. Okay, so we have the 17th, and, subject to making sure we have a quorum, do we want to go into October and pick a second date? Ian, what do we have in October?
1 second.
I will say this, Mr. Rice. I believe my next witness will be Damon Drummond, so he's told me that it would be the meetings for the township that would be the conflict. But my third witness, Bob Blue, I don't know his schedule. So it might very well be that the next 2 meetings, the 17th and then into October, finishing up Golda and then Damon. But I can't promise I'll fill up that entire time.
Okay, well, I think Ms. Spire's testimony,
The top secret witness list of people that were here already sitting in the front row. But I did see George scribbling furiously.
well, I think, so do we want to try to pick an October date?
Sure. Once again,
Let's try to get one in October.
So
And,
Tuesday, October 1st, Thursday, October 3rd,
So, October 1st?
1st and the 3rd for that first week. Yep.
October 1st and October 3rd.
The third is Rosh Hashanah. Half of me will be celebrating that night.
Okay, October 1st. Anything else?
Tuesday, October 8th.
October 8th? I can't. I have another meeting that night.
Sorry, Mr. Rice, are we still looking at October 1st?
Yes. Yeah, October 1st. First Tuesday of the month. Ian, anything else in October?
Just bear with me 1 second.
31st by chance?
I believe Tuesday, October 29th.
29th, the fifth Tuesday of the
Yes.
month. Nobody meets on the fifth Tuesday of the month. Okay. So we have 3 dates, September 17th, October 1st, and October 29th. You know, what I would suggest that we announce those 3 next dates, and then, you know, 1 or more of those may be subject to the quorum. But we at least put them on the calendar, and we'll plan on going forward on those 3 nights, barring some other issue. Anybody have any objection to that? Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Oh, let's go back. Sorry, that wasn't on the record, Mr. Rice. Thank you, Norma.
Norma, thank you. Okay, the board and the parties went off the record and discussed future dates. We have 3 dates for future hearings, all at 6:30 in this location, September 17th, October 1st, and October 29th.
All at 6:30, Mr. Rice?
6:30, same time, same place. And there'll be no further advertisement. The dates will be posted on the township's website. If anybody has any questions between now and the next meeting, feel free to reach out to either me or Peggy Hagan. Okay. PM. Yeah, September 17th, October 1st, and October 29th. Okay, any other questions? We need a motion to adjourn?
Can I have a motion to adjourn? Second? Thank you. All in favor? Everybody? Kathy, raise your hand. Thank you. We're adjourned.